Stories from the Porch. We're just about to get started. I see some new faces here today, so you probably don't know our story. My name is Michele. That's my husband, Will, and our kids are both in the house right now. Stories from the Porch started 4 years ago as an offshoot of a Porch Fest music festival that we held in 2016 in downtown Niagara Falls. And the Stories from the Porch was meant to keep that community vibe going. And so this is our 4th summer doing Stories from the Porch. I would like to introduce Michele Deluca. She is going to be our speaker tonight, and I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Good, thank you. Let me see this first. I love what Shelley and Will are doing, and any of my books that you buy tonight, I'm going to be donating the proceeds back to Porch Talks, because I just love the idea of sharing ideas and exploring new thoughts, and I really appreciate that you invited me here. I also appreciate that you all came out on a nearly 100-degree heated day. I don't know, what is that in Celsius? Really hot.
It's about 32.
Yes, that's when you say that. Now you know in our country that's freezing. So
There would be snow.
it's okay. I love it. My daughter-in-law is Canadian, and I love this country. I am an American journalist. I don't have to explain to any of you what that means today in my country, but I do want to say that people become journalists because they believe in the truth. And journalists, by virtue of their occupation, are inclined to not just, we have a saying, if your mother tells you that she loves you, get 2 other sources to check it out. And it's true, that's how we're raised in the industry. Every journalist, every good journalist believes in the truth. And the fact that our American president hasn't acclimated to the idea of a free press yet is troublesome to all of us. But that's not particularly great news, and what I am here to talk about is information that I have been researching my entire adult life that keeps hope in my heart and makes me feel like every day that there is a reason to be happy to be alive on this planet, no matter what country you're in. So I am a journalist. Let me tell you a little bit about my background. I started as a copy kid. We called them copy boys in the olden days, about 1977 at the Buffalo Courier-Express. One of the major papers, and there were 2 major papers at the time, the Buffalo News and the Buffalo Courier-Express, and we had about 250,000 readers, and it was an extraordinary joy to learn the newspaper business that way. If you can imagine, I worked in a newsroom the size of a football field, and the entire place was filled with smoke, because you had to smoke, and if you didn't smoke, you smoked in self-defense. Everything around you in the newsroom was made out of very cheap paper, including the paper we typed our stories on, including the newspaper itself. And you can only imagine how much fun it was for the copy kids. Our job was to deliver coffee, deliver newspapers, hide until they needed us or started screaming for us, because we'd be the carriers. We'd be kind of like the servants of the newsroom. And one of our jobs was to dump the ashtrays into the bins with it. The fact that any newspaper didn't go up in flames is still astounding to me, but it was a great time to be in the newspaper business, and I learned everything I know about reporting and journalism from that place with really fine journalists. Now I'm working, well, let me tell you the route I took. In 1982, the Courier-Express folded, gave way to the Buffalo News. It was a union thing, and the unions voted 1 dead and 1 living. It could have been either paper. It was the evening paper that survived, the Buffalo News. I was unemployed, and I had no identity other than my occupation. I didn't know how to be anything but a journalist. I have been recording the things around me since I was like 9 years old, when I'd walk down the alley and jot down notes about the neighbors, just because I had my first newspaper when I was 11 that I created myself, and it's something I was born to do, and it's work that I really love to do. That's kind of how, well, just to take you to me today. So I worked as a copy kid at the newspaper. I worked about 10 years as a journalist there before it closed. I was unemployed for a while, and then I took a job as a holistic health magazine editor. It was a holistic journal, and I learned all about the things that that are becoming popular today in terms of health and wellness, which is kind of tending to the body, mind, and the soul, and keeping all well. After that, I worked a little while at a cable station making TV shows, and that was a blast. And then I returned home to the newspaper business, the Niagara Gazette, where I work to this day. And I'm getting close to retirement, and I want to go back. I want to continue writing stories. I've got all kinds of stories in my head that need to be written, and now I feel like my clock is ticking. So that's how I landed at where I am today. But let me go back to my first, where the story begins. I'm a copy kid, promoted to a journalist after I finally get my 4-year journalism degree. I'm a very young journalist. I know nothing at all. My editor asks me to go do a story about a psychic who's teaching blind people how to see colors with their hands, how to feel the energy of a color. And it's at the Blind Association, and I was mightily impressed by her. She was also teaching them how to travel in their minds, in their imagination. So if they would travel on a journey, they would go into a meditation and imagine being there, so that when they arrive, they've kind of been there. They have a certain level of comfort. And this was the class that she had, was delighted by what they were teaching her. I don't want to say, yes I do. If you play with energy, you can feel the color. They learned that in her class, and I learned it much later from her. And this is how that happened. I walk back to the newsroom, and I'm a cub reporter. I got my notebook and my pencil, and I say to my city editor, he's smoking, and he looks up at me, and he's really cranky, and I say, I have the best story. This is such a great story. This psychic is teaching blind people how to feel colors with their hands. And he's like, there's a cloud of smoke around his head. And then this columnist, who I am so enamored of, she is so brilliant. She writes the greatest columns. She walks by and she goes, that woman ought to be in jail. And I was caught believing in front of my boss and this columnist, and I was like, ooh, okay, my bad. And I proceeded to write that story, now aware that in my industry, psychics, intuition, feeling energy, is not necessarily a thing you want to promote in the daily newspaper. I write this story way more constrained than I would have if I hadn't heard that from the columnist. And then I went on to forget about it for a long while, but always wondering whatever happened to that psychic. It turned out that that columnist's husband was one of the founders of the Skeptical Association at the University of Buffalo, and they had been in conversation with her about debates, but she had found them to be a little too aggressive and simply didn't want to debate. And I guess I can understand that. It's kind of hard to go back and figure out really what that was about, but she was angry, her husband was angry, and they didn't think very highly of this woman. Fast forward 10 years, the newspaper closes, and I am casting about for something to write. This is freelance, because now I'm raising babies, I'm unemployed, and I think about this psychic, and I think, I wonder what she's doing today. And I give her a call, and she says, hey, I'm starting a week-long training session on intuition, teaching people how to find their intuition. Why don't you come and you can write about it? And I was perfect. So I go, and I think I'm just going to stand and stare at these people for a week while they learn about their intuition. And in fact, she would have none of that. She asked me to join in, and simply by virtue of not wanting to feel like a spy, going like this, I joined in. And to my great surprise, now this is a class, try to imagine it. There's a truck driver in a t-shirt, and there's a businesswoman with a beautiful scarf, and there's a married couple. The woman dragged her husband to this week-long class, and he was not happy about it. There was a race car driver, and a wide assortment of other people that you might meet in a supermarket line. They were fascinating. And all of them were there to learn about their intuition. Now, I don't know how all of you feel about intuition. I feel like, from my vantage point now, that I know we all have it, we could choose not to use it. We can rely on our intellect. Very often I rely on my intellect. It's served me a lot better. But now I'm aware that when I rely on my intellect without checking in with my intuition, I'm tying one hand behind my back. Again, jumping way ahead. So, I spend a week in that class, and I find out all kinds of things that I can do, the reporter, that I wasn't aware that I could do. I mean, she would have us go into a meditation, and then we would feel each other's energy, and it turns out you can feel anyone, apparently, if you take into account these 30 people. you can feel the changes in someone's energy if you feel their body, and you can. I personally, I wasn't very good at guessing if it was what the spices were in the white envelopes. I was really bad at that, but I did hold someone's picture in my hand, and I was able to tell the person across from me who that person was simply by looking inside my imagination. It was his mother. How many children? I could see there were 6, and that he was the youngest because he came in last. And all of a sudden, it became clear to me how this information comes to you if you pay attention to it. You don't ever have to, but if you pay attention, I discovered it will come. So I wrote a book, my first book, about these classes. It wasn't that good. I was a very young writer, but I wanted to record this experience. And so I put it aside and went back to my life. But what I wasn't aware of was how over the years, as I grew, as I aged, as I matured, how this class, actually there was a second class. I was so fascinated, I attended another series of classes that she gave, and at the end of it, she says, my interest is not making you a psychic. I don't want you to go out and give readings. I just want you to be better at whatever it is that you do. And it turns out that worked for me. You know, I know I'm a better journalist because I feel like when I sit down with someone and I turn my attention to them, I understand them better. Because maybe it's because I've dropped some barriers. Maybe it's because I understand a little bit more about what I'm capable of. I'll never hold their keys in my hand and tell them who they are. I have no need to. Plus, that's a little weird for me. But I was able to do it in these classes. Never again did I have to do it, but I was surprised to learn how I could. I held a pair of keys in my hand, a set of keys, and I said to the person who gave them to me, the person that owns these keys looks a little bit like Jeff Goldblum, the guy who was in Jurassic Park. And they said, yeah, that's right. And all of a sudden I saw a pair of white sneakers on his feet, and I said, he wears sneakers, and then he laid down on the couch in my imagination. And Jeff laid down on the couch, and I said, he wears sneakers, but he's kind of lazy. And she said, that is exactly right. Now, having had no experience with any of this, I thought it was all bizarre, but it profoundly changed me to believe more in myself. That really helps when you're a journalist, to know that if you're having a thought, you might want to pay attention to it. It's served me over the years more than I can even say. So, fast forward to now, I'm having small children. And despite my experience in the class with the psychic, I'm still kind of I'm still on the fence, you know. But I don't have anything to teach my boys, because classic journalist, I can, possibly because I'm a Libra, if you're into that, I see both sides of the story always. I'm able to do that, and it could be my nature, could be my zodiac sign, all depends on what your belief is. But it served me as a journalist, and yet I believed in nothing strongly. So, and to top that, as a young mother, I was very close to my own mother. She was always there for me when my children were growing up, and I loved her very, very much. And one day, when I was probably about 35, I looked at her and thought, holy crap, she's going to die one day. And I know doesn't that sound insane? But it's true. If you don't think about it, then all of a sudden, boom, you think, wow, that means I'm going to die one day too. And it brought me to research on death and dying, because as is my nature, when I don't understand something, I begin to explore it. So I read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the German doctor, Swiss German doctor, who created the stages of grief, who also interviewed children about their near-death experiences. And that her work with near-death experiences brought up a passion in me that I'll never be able to understand. From that point on, I became a hospice volunteer. I wanted to get as close to death as possible so I could understand it. And in my role as a hospice volunteer, because of my TV experience, I became a videographer. And I would videograph hospice patients, and they would tell me their stories, and it would give them such satisfaction to know that I was recording their life, that there would be a document that they could pass on to their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And when I was doing that work, I was thinking, wouldn't it be awesome to have a video of your great-great-grandmother? Does anybody know their great-great-grandmother personally? I know I don't, and I just think, wouldn't it be cool? So anyway, I really enjoyed the hospice work, and so thankfully did the hospice patients. We would we would share family photographs and family stories, and we would laugh, and it was a very joyful experience. Possibly the highlight of my videography career. So, anyway, learning about death and dying. I'm going to almost get to the point here. I became obsessed with the idea of near-death experiences thanks to the information and the research of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I went on to explore this concept because for me it meant that whether or not I believe, and I always say I wouldn't go to the stake for this, but I began diving into the research about people who have near-death experiences and come back. And I always feel like it's a common subject. Everybody knows about near-death experiences. And the other day I said to a lady, so have you ever heard of near-death experiences? And she said, no. And I was like, wow, okay. So I need to talk about it some more. A near-death experience is what occurs when people die and they are brought back. We have a lot more of them in our culture now because we have the equipment to bring them back, bring people back from death. Flatline, heart stop, brain stop, we can bring them back. And when they come back, they often report an experience of having gone to the light. Everybody knows about going to the light. I'm not sure anybody believes it, but apparently it happens to a lot of people. The experiences are extraordinary. They're life-changing. They go somewhere. They very often meet with beings that they converse with. They're extraordinary and life-changing. And when they come back, they are never again afraid of death or dying. And it turns out about a couple 100,000 Americans, sorry, and forgive me for only having American statistics, but if you move that over to Canada, about a couple 100,000 Americans have these experiences a year. And nobody really talks about them because they're bizarre, but everybody writes a book about them. And if you Google them, or you go listen to a TED Talk, or you go to YouTube, there are hundreds of stories, and I find them fascinating and wonderful and life-changing. I re-listened to a TED Talk the other day from this guy. He's an American, very wealthy, from a very wealthy lineage. Both of his parents had, I think, been responsible for starting at least a couple of different states back hundreds of years ago. And so this guy gave a TED Talk. Everybody, TED Talks are on YouTube, and they're technology, education, and development, and they're always 20-minute videos from people all over the world who are researching or knowledgeable about interesting subjects, any interesting subject. So this guy, Louis Brown Griggs, from very wealthy family. I don't know why that matters to me, but it's just interesting. He died twice and was brought back twice. And he said of dying, I want to assure you that the precise moment is nothing but pure bliss, pure release, pure joy, pure love, pure light, and if you can stand it, none of these words here are enough. I just find it interesting in our culture, in North America, throughout the world. People don't talk about death and dying, and those that do are describing it as the most extraordinary experience of their life. I like to point out that that doctors believe this experience of going to the light, of talking to beings, and coming to understand that we are consciousness outside of our body. Doctors like to believe that it's a response of the body from the dying process. But, and Joanne, forgive me for drawing you into this, but nurses who are at bedsides are more inclined, do you think, to be open to this kind of thing?
Yeah.
You're nurse practitioner, right?
Yes.
Yes. And I'm not sure if you are, because we've never talked about it, but I know that when I talk to nurses, they are more often open to the idea that the bedside of a dying person is sometimes very, very sacred and a miraculous place to be. It's kind of something that. Anyway, let me just tell you the end of the story about Louis Brown Griggs. He went on to become someone who deals with businesses and teaches them. His whole point is inclusion, that we are all the same. That's the lessons that he came back with was, you could have $1 billion, but our souls are very much the same. We all come from the same place, wherever it is out there, and we all go back to that place. And forgive me if it offends any of your religious beliefs. These experiences they are non-denominational, and they occur to people all over the world, and they have been occurring since the beginning of time. So, why am I telling you all this? Well, after learning from my experience with the intuitive teacher, I knew that there were things I didn't know, that I was more capable of things, that maybe we were all more capable of things, of doing things, of connecting, of learning about our consciousness outside of our bodies, than maybe we bother paying attention to. So, and yet I knew with all the research and the information about this out there, that people were still terrified of dying. They don't talk about it, and I thought, well, okay, so I'm going to write a story based on real people's stories, but I'm going to write a novel. Is anybody familiar with Jonathan Livingston Seagull? Richard Bach took his metaphysical beliefs and created this beautiful story about a seagull who believes he's more than his fellow seagulls who simply just want to swoop around and hunt for French fries. And it touched me. There was another one. It's all a little new agey, but there are experiences like this in every religion and in every holy book, and so it's just something I wish people would open up their minds to, and that's why I wrote a novel called Forevermore, a love story from the edge of eternity, and it incorporates all these real life stories into a love story about a man and a woman. The woman is alive and the man is dead, and it's about their relationship in the context of all the things that I've discussed. And I think that I could do a reading. I was thinking about just reading a bit of Forevermore. And again, forgive me if this goes against any of your religious beliefs. In this book, my main character is a school teacher. Her marriage is ending. Her husband cheated on her, and she's leaving him and going back to her childhood home, which is Lilydale in New York. If you guys are familiar with Lilydale, it's a 150-year-old community where mediums, where the spiritualist religion has several churches, and spiritualists believe they're mostly Christian, but they believe we can talk to the dead. That's the foundation of Lilydale. You have to be a medium, certified medium to live there. My heroine is not a believer. Her mother and grandmother were mediums, and when her marriage dissolves, she goes back to Lilydale for the summer to visit her mother's best friend, a practicing medium at Lilydale, and stays with her. She's getting over the grief of her lost marriage, and through boredom, she takes a introduction to mediumship class, and this is how she hooks up with the dead guy. Throughout this book, there are experiences that have happened that have been reported in actual stories from people who have died and come back. If anybody ever found my phone, they would think I was the daughter of darkness, because so many books on my Kindle are about death and dying. So many books on my Kindle are about near-death experiences and the extraordinary adventures people have when they're hit by a car or drowned in a river or in some other manner struck by lightning. And I've incorporated all of those into this book in a way that I hope is entertaining and amusing, and makes people think about the fact that there's more to come. Now, I have gone on and on, so I'm just going to read, because I'm here, I'm just going to read a little bit from the third chapter when she arrives at Lilydale. Her name is Rebecca, my main character, and she meets up with, well, it starts where she leaves her husband. They've had a big argument. He wants her to help raise the baby he's having with his girlfriend on the side, and she doesn't think that's a great idea. The next day, I packed some things into the back of my silver Prius and drove 2 hours to Lilydale, the little lakeside community in western New York where I was raised. It was a place where people talked to the dead. I wanted to see Maeve O'Toole, my mother's best friend. She was the only person left in my life who had loved me since I was born. Although I had been appallingly bad at responding to her faithful stream of cards and emails, her communications always made me feel as if I were still connected to the people and places of my childhood. And though she knew I never had much interest in the spiritualist religion that inspired the birth of Lilydale more than 130 years ago, she made it clear the little town would always be my home. "Darling girl," Maeve said when she saw me through her screen door, standing forlornly on her porch. I tried to smile at her words, but I've always felt like Maeve's darling girl, and silent tears spilled from my eyes. We embraced, and I inhaled the familiar scent of the incense she burned before doing a reading. Her white hair was wrapped in a bun at the nape of her neck, and her bangs trimmed neatly over sharp blue eyes, which surveyed me thoughtfully when we pulled out of our hug. "What's happened to you?" "I need to talk to my mom," I said, wiping away my tears. Maeve looked into my eyes for a moment and then nodded. "Yes, you do. But not right now. You look tired, my girl. You need to rest." She pulled me into her comfortable living room, which was unchanged since I had last seen it years before. I sat down across from her and told her of the challenges I had been facing, my worry that the cancer had returned, and my husband's betrayal. Bless her heart, she didn't look the least bit horrified, perhaps because she'd heard so many sad stories in her work as a medium, where she communicated with the spirit world for grieving humans who longed to speak to their dead. She reached for my hand and held it tight. "Why don't you stay here with me for a few weeks and we'll figure out the rest later," she said, in a tone that made me feel 10 years old again, transporting me back to the days when she and my mother were raising their children together. Maeve's own 2 daughters were my dearest friends from childhood, but I'd kept in little better contact with them than I had with her, and yet being back in Lilydale, it felt like nothing had changed. Maeve put me up in the small guest apartment over her garage. From the tiny porch, I could see the entire community with its walkways, courtyards, cottages, surrounded by thick woods of ancient trees. I felt comforted by the immersion into my childhood memories. For the first time in a long while, I was able to breathe. I could read more, but I wonder if you wouldn't rather talk about some of the things that I've researched and learned about, and some of the experiences you may have had. And other than that, just I have these books that I'm offering up so that there'll be a little money in the coffers for your wonderful program. So, does anybody think that's a big pile of garbage?
I think my mom, who's 87, had been quite ill, and I was working that day at the hospital. My daughter-in-law, who she was staying with that day, called me and says something's wrong. We call her Mamie. Something's wrong with Mamie, but she had been not feeling good for a week and she didn't look good. I said, just bring her to the emergency room. I'm working. I'll come down. Came down. My mother looked terrible. She looked at me and she said, "I'm okay, just let me go." I go, "What are you talking about, Ma?" Because I thought she was confused, Go where? I just want to go. She says, "I'm tired and I'm ready and I'm okay." So, but prior to that, when she was more functional and we would go out, she says, "I'm getting old." She says, "I'm really afraid to die." I go, "Why?" I said, "Well, I think maybe we all are afraid to die." And then all of a sudden, that day she came in and felt so bad. She said, "I'm okay. I feel good if I could just go." So.
You never expected it.
No. She didn't go. She's still here.
Oh, she's still here?
Wow.
I said, "You're not going anywhere, Ma. We're going to take care of you," and, they did what they had to do. And she said to me after, she said, I said, "Mom, you were so sick." She says, "I know." She says, "But you know what? I didn't feel sick. I just felt like I wanted to go and I was okay and I didn't feel sick." But she was quite ill. She got over that, and she's not 100%, but she's functional.
Yeah.
But it was just amazing to me that, all these talks we had, and she says, "I don't want to die. I want to see," she has great-grandchildren. "I want to see my great-grandchildren." My grandchildren are her 7 of them are her great-grandchildren. And, she said, I just want to be able to see, some of them get married. And, she's seen 1 graduate from college, 2 graduate from high school. And, but it was just amazing that day she came in, she just was so calm and said, I'm ready.
Interesting. Is she still afraid of dying? Now that she's had that experience.
I took her to the doctor, I don't know, last week, and she says, I don't want to die. I says, well, I don't think anybody wants to die. But that day that she was so sick,
It's so interesting. I recently, one of my favorite books on this topic was written by a brain surgeon, Eben Alexander. And he, doctors always think this stuff is just ridiculous, just storytelling. And he describes an entire week-long experience when he should have been dead. And he knows because he's a brain surgeon. There was no activity in his brain. And he describes the most extraordinary experience in wherever it is that we go when we're not in our bodies. And he even met up with a sister that he didn't know he had. He had never been told that he had a sister. And he met her in that place. I don't know, every religion, every person has another name for it, but in that place where that we go when we're out, when our consciousness is out of our body. Does anybody have any stories like that? I mean, do you?
I went to Lilydale. My ex-wife and I, my mother-in-law had died, and my ex-wife was hell-bent on somehow trying to connect with her in the afterworld. So we decided to go to Lilydale. I put my last $20 in the gas tank so we could go. So we get there, and
Man, I hope this ends well.
they have this big, beautiful forest. And you walk into the forest, and there's an area where I guess it's like an altar, and there's benches all the way around.
It's a tree. They call it the stump, and then that's just where they.
So you go in there because one of the psychics is going to come in and do a couple of quick readings or something like that. So we go in, we sit down. The psychic comes in, and he's walking in the middle between all the benches, the wooden benches. And as he's walking, he's singing a hymn, and the hymn that he's singing is my mother-in-law's favorite hymn. So now he gets up there and he's looking around. Now, as you can see, I like to wear colorful shirts. I'm sitting almost 3/4 of the way back. He looks at me and he says, "Can I touch with you for a minute?" I didn't know what he meant by that, so I stood up. He said, "Do you ever feel somebody with an arm on your shoulder?" And I said, "No, not really." He said, "Well, you know what? You're concerned, but you're going to be okay. You're going to have money. You're going to be comfortable and live a comfortable life." And I left there. The first thing I did was buy a lottery ticket. But in the long run of things, because of income property that I later purchased and property that I've sold, I am comfortable. Very comfortable. So, the guy was right. And they had a Mark Twain guy there, too. A guy performing as Mark Twain.
Oh, yes.
And this guy looked exactly like him, spoke like Mark Twain, and we went into the hall there, and we listened to one of his lectures, and it was hilarious. It was great.
Yeah, he's a newscaster from Buffalo.
That's right, yeah.
And he does that really, really well.
So that was my experience at Lilydale.
That's a good story.
And then, as a matter of fact, my ex-wife, she's planning to go back. I think they're going this summer, back down to Lilydale.
It's challenging to find every time you go someone who is spot on. It's like I feel like this is a gift that really needs to be refined, and but it's always interesting to
But
me.
my mother-in-law had always told my wife, if there's a way in hell I
I'll
can
get
let
back.
you know, I will do it. So maybe that was it. That guy walking down the aisle singing her favorite hymn.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for sharing that, because that's kind of, it's actually, for me, it's more the mystery, as well as the research, which proves that people are happier, the people who have had near-death experiences come back and they're more intuitive and they're less afraid of death and dying, which I really like to hear. Because honestly, even with all my research, I've got pretty much both my feet in the real world, where I work in an urban city where there's lots of poverty and crime as a journalist. So you can imagine that I'm exposed to lots of different types of people. The good news is I'm a features reporter most often when they don't need me to cover police stories or court stories, whatever. I kind of fill in, but mostly I write stories about wonderful people. So that also gives me hope because I meet them often and I write their stories. And I feel like they're the ones you don't hear about a lot. When you read the newspaper, you watch the news, you hear about the extraordinary events that happen because they're extraordinary. And you don't hear about, no matter where that news occurs, the 10,000 other people in that very neighborhood who went to work every day and loved their children and loved their families and picked up garbage on the street or took care of somebody who was impoverished. Nobody ever tells those stories because they're little tiny stories, but but I see them, I hear them, and I'm here to tell you that that the world is really much more beautiful than we give it credit for. You know, we just don't hear all the goodness. Yes. What?
Council acceptance, right?
Yes. The
And,
council.
yes, and the Queen's mother was born in 1900, and her older brothers were in the First World War, and one was killed, and then they got, I was just reading this today in her bio, and then they got a message that the second one, she had a whole bunch of them, was killed, and her younger brother would not go to the memorial service for him. And he said, he insisted that he saw him in a house with a bandage on his head, and that he was okay. And then they found out later he was a prisoner of war and he had shrapnel
Wow.
in his head, and they found him.
If you read a lot of people's stories like that, if you read a lot of biographies and autobiographies, you will, there's so often, you'll find circumstances like that. And I just think it's a mystery and it's fascinating. And I think all the time about why we're here and if we're, you know, how we create our own lives by every decision that we make every single day, deciding who we want to be. The people who die and come back come with one message only. And that is that we're here to love each other, to practice love, to learn love, to accept each other as we are. And that is the key, they say, to a successful life and to being your best self. That's a message that I can get behind. And I think that's why I'm so obsessed by this research. Anyway, my aunt, when she was dying, was in the shower, and I know, that doesn't sound right, but she was with her daughter. She was older. Her daughter was helping her. She was infirm. But my beautiful aunt had a lifelong love affair with her husband, and who had passed previously. And in the shower, she said to her daughter, "Your father is here." And she reached out to him, and she passed. Those kind of stories give me shivers and make me so happy. Whether or not he was actually there, I don't know. But I like to believe that he came for her, and I would like to believe that when we die, if you listen to any of the stories, just Google it once. It's extraordinary, and we are surrounded by people that love us.
I had a similar situation when my grandmother died. She was 97. My grandfather was much older than her and died, you know, years before. But a few days before she died, she's talking to someone, and we said to her, "Who are you talking to?" She goes, "My husband, of course. He's here for me." We're like, "Whoa!" And she,
Why does it freak us out? It
I
always
believe-
freaks us
I
out. Like,
believe-
oh,
We're
yeah.
looking around to see, are they really in the room?
I believe she really had that experience. I mean, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross mentioned in her
Right,
books
deathbed visions.
a lot of people come, you know, to welcome you, to make you
It
comfortable
sounds
in the
crazy.
transition. Yeah.
And every bit of my logic resists it. That's why I immerse myself in it, because I'm so fascinated by the concept. I know, daughter of darkness. Actually, I'm not the daughter of darkness. I'm the daughter of light. That's what the people say. They say it's all about the light. It's all about the goodness. And there's a lot of that going around. Anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, when I was 13 years old, my best friend died of a drug overdose. Fast forward 10 years, and I'm working in a dental office, a brand new office to me, and I was struggling with so many relationships in there, and staff relationships. It was really intense and frustrating. And in my sleep, my friend would come to me with all the solutions, and I knew exactly what to do to correct the problems in the office.
That's bizarre.
It's really incredible.
I didn't
Did you tell everybody? That sounds crazy.
I know, it does sound crazy, and it was just so unbelievable. And I've asked her to come back since then, because, you know,
You know what's funny is you don't need her now. She can probably help you navigate through there.
I don't know. But on another occasion, a cousin of my mother's was dying, and I didn't have a close relationship with her at all. In fact, I almost never saw her. And as she was struggling with ovarian cancer, I went to her house to just have a cup of tea with her. And I barely got in the door. And she looked straight at me and she said, "There is always going to be enough." Oh my goodness. There's always enough. She intuitively knew that I would struggle my whole life wondering if I have enough. I have to stand on my own 2 feet. I have no one to look after me, no family to pick me up. And she somehow knew that. And so even though I I struggle to let the moths out of my wallet because I'm not sure I believe her. It is a source of some peace and
Some peace,
tranquility,
if you allow
knowing
it. You can
if I
discount
just
it and
bring
go.
her back, I know I'm gonna be okay.
And is it a knowing? That's kind of what they talk about. They talk about a knowing that you have no question.
Yeah.
Like you know that it's real. And
Yeah.
that's also that's absolutely beautiful. And again, I immerse myself in stories like this because for me, dealing with a lot of hardship in life, writing about people and immersing myself in the news every day, I need that to keep me balanced. I need to hear that there are these sacred, beautiful stories of connection to something we don't understand.
You also believe in reincarnation?
I'm afraid I do, because again, it's in the research. You know, you go to a hypnotist, you get sent back to a past life, and all of a sudden you find out you were hanged, and that explains why you're having trouble with your neck. You know, I mean, it's crazy. Maybe it's psychological, but honestly, it's the only thing that explains to me why some people are born poor or handicapped or billionaires or presidents. It explains because what people have said when they come back relentlessly in these stories is that each lifetime is an opportunity to learn that we actually, this sounds crazy too, forgive me, this is what they say, we choose our challenges. And the whole point of being here is to evolve within those challenges. Everybody I know says, why would I choose this? That's crazy. You're supposed to feel that way, I suppose, because if you knew you chose it, you'd go, oh, I chose this, okay, no problem. But it's again, I adore these stories because they keep me optimistic, they keep me hopeful, and they help me to understand that we're here for a reason. And that's why I believe in reincarnation, because what else would make sense? And again, if I'm offending any of your religious beliefs, I'm sorry.
I'm looking.
It has been shown in some research, and as a journalist, I know you can prove anything with any research, that the idea of reincarnation was struck from the Bible because the religious leaders at the time didn't want people to think they were going to have another chance to go around. That could be, that could be the campfire story, but I've read it many times about that, and it doesn't matter to me. It makes sense. It simply makes sense. It explains the Holocaust to me, which I just took me. It's whoever gets over the idea of that, and the only way you can even sort of get over it is to think perhaps that this was some sort of an opportunity to grow. It certainly has taught us all a lesson about all kinds of things, I think. So it's an idea, it's a concept. I'm only asking that you think about it and consider that there's something wonderful waiting. So that's all. Anybody else got good stories? All right, well then you might want to read my book, which has some really good stories. And as you're reading it, remember everything that occurs in this book I have read in a true account by someone among the thousands of true accounts. So, and then there's this one. I'm only pushing them because I really want.
Oh,
This one's
Michelle, you're
5,
fantastic.
This one's 10, and all the money will go to the Porch Times because this is really fun and it's an opportunity to hear new ideas and share old ideas, and I am honored to be part of it. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was amazing.
I appreciate you saying that.
Anybody have questions at all?
Will you sign our books?
Oh, yes, definitely. I think that's a must. Do you need a
I would be
Sharpie?
honored to sign your books.
Thank you so much for coming. Please stick around. We do a bit of a social time, have some coffee, tea, snacks, and we will see you next week. Although next week I'm not sure who's coming because no one has confirmed with me yet. So it's a mystery.